content presented in this podcast is based on real events and may contain graphic descriptions of violence, sensitive topics, and explicit language that may be triggering, offensive, or sensitive subjects to some viewers and listeners. Discretion is advised. The purpose of this podcast is to explore and discuss true crime cases for entertainment and educational purposes only. This podcast does not intend to glorify or sensationalize crime, but rather aims to analyze and understand the complexities of human behavior in the criminal justice system. We encourage listeners to approach this content with empathy, critical thinking, respect for the victims and their families. Patrick Knowlton was a key witness in the death of Vince Foster on July 20th, 1993. He arrived at Fort Marcy Park in McLean, Virginia, just outside of D.C. around 4:30 p.m., and reported seeing a blue-gray sedan with a man already inside, along with another individual described as a Hispanic male, in the parking lot, details that didn't fully match the official timeline. Now, Knowlton later claimed his testimony was misrepresented by investigators, alleging key elements were altered or minimized. He went on to file a lawsuit against the FBI and other federal officials, and that's where John Clarke comes in, accusing them of distorting his account and engaging in misconduct. Now, although the lawsuit failed to change the official ruling of Vince Foster's death by self-infliction, Knowlton's testimony was continued to haunt the case, suggesting what he witnessed may not have been ignored, but intentionally reshaped to fit a predetermined narrative. So with that being said, it's time to start the show. Let's hit it. Hi, welcome to another episode of Mysteries Mayhem and Merlot. I am your host, Winnie Schrader. Well, we're going to kind of go back in time to the 90s. I love the 90s. I was in high school. I mean, good time. But there was a lot of political controversy going on when Bill Clinton was in office. And now you're thinking, okay, who is Vince Foster? That name sounds so familiar to me. Well, Vince Foster was a close confidant to Bill Clinton. They were actually best friends. And he was also the deputy White House counsel. And he was found dead July 20th, 1993 in Fort Marcy Park of an apparent self-inflicted wound to himself. And of course, that questions everything, and conspiracy theories just started coming about. But Foster's position in the White House placed him in the center of a growing web of relationships and tensions, and he had ties to figures who would later become pivotal, sorry, words is hard today for me, and the most explosive political scandals. And yes, and we're talking about Monica Lewinsky. Linda Tripp's involved. I mean, there were so many key players involved in that whole scandal, but it seemed like Vince Foster was kind of the guy who got the short stick out of the bunch. But so I wanted to get some people who are close to that case, and I came across one of the key witnesses in the case was Patrick Knowlton, who apparently saw um, him at the park with another gentleman, which doesn't fit the narrative that he caused this with a self-inflicting wound. So I got to be careful with my words. But and that's where John Clarke comes in. He was the attorney for Patrick Knowlton and represented him in the lawsuit against the FBI because they misrepresented what he said, what his actual statements were. So I'd love to welcome John Clarke to the show, but I also have another guest that actually worked right alongside John, and that's Hugh Turley, who is a researcher, investigator, and helped with the investigation and put this whole case together for Patrick Knowlton. So I'd like to welcome them both to the show. Welcome to the show, John and Hugh.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, so obviously, 1993, I was in high school, and of course, everything on the news was the whole Monica Lewinsky, Bill Clinton sex scandal. But there was so much more at play than just that. I mean, you had Kenneth Starr involved, Linda Tripp involved, well, Vince Foster, so but at the time, I wasn't so tied to the inner workings of what was happening. It was more of this, salacious part of the story because I was a teenager. So what do teenagers like? Drama. Uh, can you kinda give us kind of a timeline and kind of a something that led up to Vince taking his own life?
Yes, he did not take his own life. There was July 20th, 1993. That was in Bill Clinton's first term. And Vince Foster came to Washington a little bit late. He wasn't here for the inauguration. He came, I believe, in February. And on July 20th, 1993, someone drove him to Fort Marcy Park, which is rarely traveled. It's usually deserted, where he was shot just below the jawline, right here, and the bullet went up into his head, and there was no exit wound. So I can say all of this with absolute confidence. And you may be wondering, well, how can I be so sure? Well, the reason is because when the 911 call went in at 6 p.m. That day, the body was not ready for its official discovery. And when I say that, I mean it entirely was not ready. They had not placed the drop gun in his hand. His car was not there. His car keys were not there. The responding Fairfax County Fire and Rescue saw the bullet wound in his neck.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's not a common way to do that, you know, and I know there has been experts that have done, uh, you know, examples of trying to shoot, like, melons and stuff and saying there was no possible way he could have inflicted this type of wound to himself in that manner, and it seems like every time there's some type of political tie, we always get these jumbled type. I mean, we went through it with the Kennedy, assassination, things like that. There's always they always try and poo-poo anybody's actual opinion on how it couldn't happen that way. So, it's like, what did Vince w if I believe he was murdered as well. If with his murder, what did he know that could cause him to lose his life? I mean, what more is there to this scandal than just Monica and Bill having an affair? I feel like there's something a lot deeper at play than just that for him to
Well,
lose his life.
Winnie, I think you're right. There's a lot more, a whole lot more. This this case has been covered up by the American press, and it's been covered up by both parties in the Congress. It's been covered up by the Justice Department. It's been covered up by academia. It's been covered up by so many people and several independent councils. The Senate had hearings, and everyone has covered this up. So it has to be something very, very big. And I can tell you that people don't know much about the case. John could go through all of the facts in great detail if you have any crime type questions. But I would say that the uh, the cover up has been presented to the public in two ways. Either he committed or the Clintons killed him, and those are the two choices. I'm also a professional magician, so I know how to hide things, and I know how to lie. And this is we call this in my business the magician's choice, where you can choose the Clintons killed him, or take your pick. They're both wrong. I think when you want to, with John and I really don't know the answer to the question as to who did it or why, but we do know that he was murdered, and John can prove that without a doubt. But I think there's some links to some things that give us a hint to why he was killed. There are some links to some espionage with Israel, and there are some links to Jeffrey Epstein type stuff. I found a document. I'll just mention this one document that I found at the National Archives, and it was an FBI document on an FBI letterhead, and it said child abduction serial killer unit, uh, Vince Foster death investigation. Now, that's a document that was among the papers from the Office of Independent Counsel that investigated Foster's death. And one of the FBI agents, there were 6, I believe, that were assigned to the case. One of them I saw later on a television program is an expert talking about child serial murders, and he was discussing this in respect to Jeffrey Epstein. And they had him on this television program because he's an FBI profiler and this is his specialty. Well, I recognize that man because I remember him when I was working with John and Patrick on this case, and his name was Jim Clemente, and he was assigned to the Foster investigation. You have to wonder, what does child abduction and child ritual murder have to do with this case? I don't know. But as you said, it had to be something big and something very dark, something really dark. And those things, espionage and child abduction, are pretty dark.
Yeah. Yeah. And I looking research, trying to kind of make sense of what's the tie to it. Yeah, I was coming up Vince Foster and connections with Pizzagate, which
Exactly.
Pizzagate thing. And I was
Right.
like, oh dear, here we go again. It seems like it's like everything seems to be coming back to the Epstein files lately. And it's crazy how we're in hindsight, we wouldn't even have thought of it, but now it's like, oh, it's starting to kind of make sense, and
Right.
these things in the past are starting to shed light on that. Now, um, yeah. So with John, you knowing the crime scene, seeing the crime scene photos of Vince, and saying, that obviously he couldn't make that self inflicted wound. I mean, what type of when it comes to a case like this, is it just a straight up medical examiner that does the autopsy and findings, or is there like a special person that has to come in and do it?
It was the medical examiner who ruled that it was among others. Um, but let me. I don't want to digress too much, but I want to tell you about the role of the press.
Yeah.
In this, in 1997, I submitted on Patrick's behalf a submission to the U.S. Court of Appeals, special division for the purpose of appointing independent counsels. That's the 3-judge Court of Appeals panel that appointed Ken Starr, and I asked them to order Ken Starr to attach evidence of a murder cover-up to his report, and he did so. The judge 3-judge panel granted my motion. Now, Ken Starr filed an opposition, and then he filed a motion to reconsider, and the court was having nothing of it. It said attach it. Now, among other things, 20 pages, it's 11-page single-space letter with 25 federal investigative records attached to it, photocopies, portions of the record, and it shows 5 different areas of a cover-up. Now, you asked about the medical examiner, the autopsy. In any event, that is at VinceFosterMurder.com, and I would commend reading to you. It's really quite stark. Now, I met with Pete Yost of the Associated Press, along with Patrick Knowlton, at the time before the report with this appendix was released to the public. And I showed it to him. It was still under seal. And I said, you can have the scoop here. You can explain. You can write about this. So he hemmed and hawed and said he wasn't going to cover it. And I said, Pete, you don't understand. This is evidence of murder cover-up, ordered attached to the independent counsel's report of the highest-ranking government official to be murdered since JFK. And so Pete said, again, he said, no, you don't understand. The article has already been written. It's in the can. The story is he was depressed and he committed, and I was dumbfounded by that. But that's the way it is. And also, let me digress for a moment into the investigative history. First, the Park Police or the public has been told that there have been 5 separate investigations all. Now, this is just disinformation. It's just not true. The first investigation was for 16 days by the Park Police, and they interviewed almost no witnesses. They didn't interview Patrick Knowlton. They didn't even interview the first U.S. Park Police officer on the scene. And they closed the case before they even tested the weapons to see whether or not it would fire. Now, and their final report was 3/4 of a page. There was really nothing in it. So that first investigation was essentially by the FBI, and there's a statute that requires that the FBI exercise primary jurisdiction to this into this murder, and they did not do so. And then the second investigation was by Robert Fisk, and the first page of his 65-page double-spaced report explains that the FBI had 5 agents assigned to his, and they worked full time. So that was an FBI investigation. And then the third investigation by the federal authorities was under Kenneth Starr. And Kenneth Starr used once again the FBI to investigate this. So we knew what the outcome was going to be. In fact, he used at least 2 of the agents assigned to him were the very same agents that were assigned to Robert Fisk. So, and then Congress, let me go through this briefly. As to the 2 investigations of Congress, one was by the Senate Banking Committee, and they didn't have jurisdiction to look into the murder. They were only looking to see whether or not the White House interfered with the Park Police investigation. Well, for starters, it wasn't a Park Police investigation. So, and they all stipulated, most of them, in opening statements, that the fact that it was. And then the other one was was by Representative Klinger, who wrote a 8-page double-spaced report saying that it was in the park, and he or his staff interviewed some Park Police officers and some FBI agents. So that's the investigative history. First FBI, second FBI, third FBI.
It was all FBI. But I think I want to go back to something John mentioned about meeting with Pete Yost, which I thought was pretty funny, because when he and Patrick left Pete Yost, they didn't think Pete understood what they were trying to tell him, and they thought for sure this was going to be reported, because getting an appendix included in the report, it's not added on the report, it's included in the report, and getting that attached, the evidence of a cover-up, was really huge. It was really big, because this is the official report. If you go to the library, at any college library that has government documents, so most of the major universities do, and it's also online at Hayfeed Digital Trust, but you can find the official report. These 20 pages are part of the official report on Foster's death. Now, when the press reported this, they only reported the first 114 pages by Kenneth Starr, and they never mentioned the appendix. And this is across the country. Now, I just happened to be in Minnesota on October 10th, 1997, when the report was released. I was visiting my mother, and I got a call from Patrick and John, and they said that the official report has been released in Washington, D.C., and they said, we're on our way to the courthouse now. See, they had the appendix. I had a copy myself because I helped write it, but I couldn't show it to anyone because it was under seal from the court. But now it's no longer under seal. Now it's being released. So I thought, well, I'm going to go down to the St. Paul Pioneer Press and tell them about this. So I'm still believing we have a free press in this country at this point. I don't know, John and Pat and I, and we just didn't know how the game was played, because we thought if we could get this thing attached, they would have to report it. And I met with this woman, Martha Malin. She was the national news editor for the Pioneer Press. It was down on Cedar Street in St. Paul. We met for half an hour. I told her the same as John and Patrick told Pete Yost to the Associated Press. I said, you can break the story. This is a big news story. This is just coming out in Washington, D.C. as we speak. It's being released by the U.S. Court of Appeals. And here it is. And we went over it. I told her what it was, showed it to her, gave her my copy. The next day I went out and bought the paper. It's just nothing. I mean, nothing. We were shocked, weren't we, John? I mean, it was just a shock. I mean, I mean, from Maine to San Diego, and to this day, not a paper in this great land of ours has ever reported that there's an appendix included in the official report on Foster's death. No wonder the public doesn't know what happened.
Right. That's like prime time news right there. I mean, what any paper would be dumb not to try and get that out first, you know?
Well,
And
you
oh
would think
man.
that's not how it works. So this was a big lesson for me and for John. It was like being in an earthquake because really the ground I was standing on no longer felt firm. I didn't know what to believe because I just didn't know that it was that bad. I didn't know that it was really that bad. And if your listeners take anything away from this program, they need to know that you cannot trust the press at all. There was a famous Trappist monk, Thomas Merton, who wrote that 9/10 of the daily news is pseudo news, made up events. He said some days it's 10/10. And this man's living in a monastery. He didn't have a television or a radio or a newspaper, and he knew that it was all
Yeah.
fake. And I thought, well, we should know because just knowing that we're getting a lot of bad information can help the public in digesting what we're being fed. You have to think about what you're being told and make an informed decision, just knowing that people are probably lying to you about
Right.
about everything.
Right. It's like a trust but verify thing for me. I'll trust it but I still gotta verify it, you know?
Right.
Are you ready to step beyond the veil? June 11th through the 13th, something extraordinary is happening. Break on through, a 3-day paranormal experience hosted by me, Dave Schrader, at the historic and haunted Palmer House Hotel in Sauk Center, Minnesota. I'm bringing together some of the most respected psychic mediums and paranormal minds for a weekend that explores the unexplained. Featuring special guest psychic mediums Chris Fleming, Diet Renee, and Sarah Lemos. This immersive event goes far beyond lectures. Dive into fascinating classes, presentations, take part in hands-on experiments, experience powerful live gallery readings, and join real paranormal investigations. So whether you're searching for answers, curious about the unknown, or hoping to connect with something beyond this world, this weekend is designed to open doors you never knew existed. 3 days, incredible guests, paranormal exploration, and more fun than should legally be allowed. Space is limited, so reserve your spot now. Visit darknessevents.com for details and tickets. That's darknessevents.com. Come explore the unknown and break on through.
Yeah, and in this case exactly, I mean, I remember watching the news reports coming out about this and how it was the Clintons and everyone was saying it was Hillary that wanted him gone, or it was Bill that wanted him gone, or something that Bill did that Hillary had to cover up, so Vince had to go. I mean, there were so many different
Yeah.
scenarios.
It's much darker than that. And we don't even know because they haven't told us. I mean, we found some clues, but I don't think we really know what it was. But I don't think this is my personal take, because I read a lot of documents. I don't think Mr. Foster was involved in pedophilia. Personally, I don't think he was. But I think he was working with people that were involved in very bad things. And I think he wouldn't have wanted to participate. And I think he wanted to get out of the administration and go back to Arkansas. If you work with gangsters kill gangsters, and I think
Right.
he got bumped off. But the reason why they bumped him off is really still a dark secret.
Yeah, it is, and it's like he had to have known something pretty big.
Well, he couldn't tell anybody though, because who can you tell?
Right. Who
So
can you tell?
it's not really what you know. It's got to be something else. It's something. It's not just because he could have leaked something to somebody, because you can't leak to the press that doesn't report the truth.
Yeah,
Mhm.
speaking of the press, uh, like I said, we talked about they did not cover the appendix, but also I wanted to talk about the autopsy. You brought that up. Maybe I can digress and talk about that for a minute. Um,
Okay.
yeah, first of all, it was rescheduled so that the investigating police officers couldn't attend, and there's a requirement that they do attend.
Okay.
So it was scheduled initially. It was a Tuesday afternoon when he died, and it was scheduled for Thursday around 9:30, and they changed it to Wednesday, the very next day at 7:30 in the morning. And so again, the police officers did not, who were investigating, the investigating police officers did not attend. But before the police arrived to witness the autopsy, it was over. It had already occurred. Dr. Byer, who had removed the soft palate where this alleged entrance wound was, had removed the brain and had put it on essentially a meat slicer and sliced it up, saying that the X-ray machine was broken. Incidentally, in the court-ordered appendix, we proved that that was a lie with government records. Um, and Dr. Barr was being helped by a unknown person, an assistant, that was unusual for that office to be using, whoever this person was. And when the police asked his name, Dr. Byer piped up and said, "You don't need his name." So Dr. Byer refused to give the name of the person who was helping him with the autopsy. Then also regarding the autopsy, there's a lab report that says that there was no powder debris on the soft palate that Dr. Byer had submitted to the Virginia lab. Dr. Byer had said it was grossly present, meaning there was so much there you could see it with the naked eye, but it obviously it wasn't there. Then there's also, we have a telex to the FBI, from the FBI to somebody in the FBI, saying that preliminary results show that there was no exit wound. According to Dr. Byer, there was a 1.5-inch exit wound at the top and the back of the head. And then also there was no official time of death in the autopsy. You would think that that would be something that should be in the autopsy.
Well, yeah.
And he did not know the caliber of the weapon. He just left that portion of the autopsy blank. So, and then lastly, the bullet trajectory is the contradictory evidence of the bullet trajectory. You know, as I said, the bullet entered in his neck, just below the jawline, and they couldn't get their story straight whether or not it was the top or the bottom of the mouth that the entrance wound the bullet trajected. So let me say one more thing, and then I'll turn it over to whatever you want to ask me. This is the report of the independent counsel, and I believe that it is was written primarily by Brett Kavanaugh, who was replaced, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But so after this was published, we, Patrick Knowlton, Hugh Turley, and I went through it, and we spent 17 months working full time, going through 10,000 pages of federal investigative records. And believe it or not, we couldn't find anything in the independent counsel's report that was true. Nothing. And you think I'm exaggerating, but I really am not. And also at thisfostermurder.com, this document appears there, and this goes through the entire independent counsel's report. And so this proves that there's nothing true in this. And this 500 pages looks intimidating, but there are 14 chapters, and 11 of them have summaries at the beginning of the chapters. So I would commend your listeners to have a look at that. And so if there's nothing in the report that's true, and we prove that, then obviously it's a cover-up.
Right. And that's another thing. Well, with this Patrick Knowlton being the key witness in this case, and him, I mean, I've never heard of anyone filing lawsuit against law enforcement, FBI, anything, because they didn't represent the witness properly in their report. I've never heard of that, and I find that very interesting.
Yeah, Winnie, it's just something should be done in this country. It would make improvement. See, the FBI, when they interview people, there's usually 2 agents, and they would come and interview you, and one of them takes notes, and they're handwritten notes. After they take these notes, they go back to their office and they type up the interview, and it gets sort of translated from handwritten notes to typewritten, and then they can put anything they want in there. Now, the witnesses that give the FBI a statement never see their statement. it's called a 302. It's an FBI 302 form, and people often refer to that document. But it's what people don't realize is, we live in an age where they could videotape an interview and it could be preserved. It could be recorded like these body cams that the police wear. But their FBI has a way where they can alter somebody's statement. Now, they altered Patrick Knowlton's statement in his 302 to make it appear that he saw Vincent Foster's car at the park. They made it sound like he saw a later model car, that it more or less fit the description of Foster's car. Now, Patrick didn't see his 302 until several years later, when a British journalist, Ambrose Evans Pritchard, tracked him down and showed him his 302 and said, "Is this what you told the FBI?" And he looked at it and he said, "Well, that's not true. That's not true. None of this is true." Patrick is a very interesting man. I wish you could have met him. He's not living any longer, but Patrick had what has been described as a fly paper memory. And he wrote a book late in his life about his childhood. And I mean, he can tell you what color the wallpaper was in the principal's office at school, because he remembers. And when you read his child story, it has dialogue in it. He's not making those dialogues up. He remembers what people said. So he's a really interesting witness in this case, because what he saw, he can't be shaken. The FBI would say, "Well, couldn't it have been, or don't you think it might have been?" He said, "No, I know what I saw, and I know what I saw." He's very firm with his memory, and I have never met anybody with a memory quite like Patrick Knowlton. So the FBI just fudged his 302, and then when he saw it, and he told this journalist that it was not true, the journalist wrote up a story that got published in London, and told about what Patrick saw at the park, about this character that he saw there that looked suspicious. And then, at first Patrick was a little worried about this story being published, but then he thought, well, it's going to be in England. Nobody's going to know about it, and nobody, who's going to know? But it did make it to the newsstands here in Washington. They have out-of-town papers. And immediately after that story got published, Patrick got a subpoena from the Office of Independent Counsel to testify, because I think that story said that he had not been interviewed by the Independent Counsel. So now he's going to go before a grand jury. And he was pretty rattled by that. And that's when he got harassed and intimidated on the streets of Washington, D.C. So not only did they falsify his witness statement when he was going to testify before the grand jury, the federal agents harassed and intimidated him. And it is quite scary. It's like something out of an Alfred Hitchcock movie. They can imagine like 26 men on every street corner. No matter which way you turn, there are people glaring and staring at you. Well, it's pretty frightening. At that point, John got called in to help Patrick. The journalist from England said, "Well, a lawyer?" And Patrick and John were neighbors, and that's how John came into the case. But I mean, at the time, Kavanaugh was just this 29-year-old guy, and there was another 29-year-old guy. I'll tell you about him too. His name was Christopher Ruddy. I don't know if you know who Ruddy is, but he owns a news organization called Newsmax, and he's a friend of the Clintons. He gave lots of millions of dollars to the Clinton fund, and he also is a friend of Donald Trump. He's a member of Mar-a-Lago, and Christopher Ruddy is a big power player. He's the one that recommended to Trump that he appoint Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court. Now, Ruddy was a friend of John and Patrick and I at the time, because we thought he was an honest journalist. He was befriending us. We didn't know, but he was actually working with the FBI. He was covering up for them. He was saying that the Clintons kept the FBI out of the case, and the FBI was not involved because the Clintons kept them out. And Ruddy was 29 when I met him. He used to come to my house and stay at my house and sleep at our home and eat at my table. My wife said to me, "Don't trust that guy. He's a bad man." I said, "Oh, come on, honey. You don't even know him. I mean, he's their hero, He's helping us." My wife said, "Don't trust him. He's not a good man. I can tell by his face." And I didn't know about this thing. You probably know about this, Winnie, but it's called women's intuition.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I learned, because I'll tell you, my wife knew, and another friend of mine's wife knew. They knew Ruddy was bad. I didn't know it. But Ruddy went up and became a powerful billionaire, a friend of the Trumps and Clintons. And Brett Kavanaugh, for his part, went up and ended up on the Supreme Court. And John and I are on the podcast with Winnie.
Yeah. Right.
So
Yeah.
who's really winning here?
Well, I don't know, cause I feel like that empire is about to crumble here soon. The more news that comes out with these Epstein like I said, it's like 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon with this everything comes back to the Epstein files. And maybe, these type of cases coming out and slowly kind of, revealing itself, maybe those are the key cases that might make that empire crumble and, you know, completely destroy that weird I don't even know what to even call those people, these elite,
Pedophiles.
uh,
Pedophiles is the word.
yeah, but it's like
I
this
think
weird.
Oh, sure. One more thing, and then I'll let John talk some more. But I wanted to tell you, Patrick and I, after the case was pretty much done, we still had this thirst for the truth. And we would go up to the National Archives and go through documents that had been released by the Independent Counsel's Office. And I found a piece of paper up there with the initials VF, which is Vince Foster, WH, which is Webster Hubble, and HC, Hillary Clinton. And at the top, above all their names, was the name Robert Maxwell. Now, he's the father of Ghislaine Maxwell.
Yeah.
So we've got a Maxwell connection to Vince Foster. And I thought, and this guy was it's been acknowledged that he was a member of the Mossad, Robert Maxwell. So I think it does kind of come back to Epstein files again. I mean, there are documents that indicate that these people are connected. And I think that if I had to guess why Foster was murdered, being associated with Robert Maxwell may have something to do with it.
Yeah. Yeah, he may have known of something that was happening that he wasn't supposed to know, and somehow maybe he found out.
He could have been a double agent. He could have been working for the CIA and the Mossad at the same time, and maybe he double crossed somebody. Who knows?
Well, it wouldn't surprise me because the way these cases are and things are playing out with this, it wouldn't surprise me at all that we had some double backhanded triple agent doing stuff for this person. It's playing out like this weird Bond slash bad TV drama for Lifetime. This whole political scandal that's surrounding this and all the people that are involved, and to know that Vince Foster now could be tied to this and his death, and then it's like, "Oh, crap, it goes back that far."
Yeah, I don't
You
think they
know?
counted on John Clarke and Patrick coming into this case because, I mean, you just don't run into people like John and Patrick every day. And
Mhm.
Patrick is this ideal witness, and John is the ideal attorney.
Right.
John did not make any money at this case, I can assure you. He threw his life into it because he's a man who's interested in justice, and he wanted to fight for the truth. And I think it really must have been a shock to Brett Kavanaugh and these people. But what we didn't know is that they had the press on their side
Mhm.
completely, and that that's why they could be so sloppy with their autopsy and the case and everything that they did, including harassing Patrick in broad daylight because they can do whatever they want to do. They're very powerful people.
Right.
Very bad.
Speaking of the now we're on the subject of the press, we have surreptitiously taped telephone interviews with Miguel Rodriguez and with his successor, Brett Kavanaugh. And in the
John, you have to tell her who Miguel Rodriguez is.
Miguel Rodriguez is the prosecutor who assigned to the case, who was run out of the office, forced to resign because he wouldn't go along with the murder cover-up. So Ken Starr replaced him with Brett Kavanaugh. And we have surreptitiously taped telephone conversations with both Brett Kavanaugh and Miguel Rodriguez. Now, Rodriguez says, and you can see these, this was at VinceFosterMurder.com. You can read those transcripts or you can listen to the tapes. And among the things that Rodriguez says, that after he was run out of the office, he contacted over 100 journalists to try and get the story out. He said that some of them were very interested and wrote the stories, but every time the editor killed the story, wouldn't let it be told. And so that's I think very, very telling. Rodriguez said he spent 9 hours. He said he used to talk with the New York Times almost every single day for a long period of time. They knew all about it. So, Hugh was talking about Miguel about Brett Kavanaugh, um, that subpoena that he received the subpoena. Well, I have a copy of the subpoena right here in front of me, as signed by Brett Kavanaugh. So, so what Brett Kavanaugh did was when he came in, he dismissed the grand jury that Rodriguez had been presenting this evidence to, so that empaneled a new grand jury who didn't know anything about any of this. So I think that's very telling.
Right. I mean, to know that there's recorded audio documentation to say that they are covering this up, and for the press to just who was buying off somebody had to been bought off in this, because like I said, I mean, too bad they didn't have social media back then, because that would have hit within just 20 seconds of it happening.
We have social media now. Maybe it'll help. But I have to tell you that John's talking about these tapes. See, there was a man in Washington that, well, he got me involved in this case because I met him at Fort Marcy Park. His name was Reed Irvine, and he was a really fine gentleman. He had an organization called Accuracy in Media, and Reed was genuinely interested in the truth. And he, like John and Patrick, and there were a few of us, but Reed, because it was legal in the District of Columbia, he taped all of his phone conversations. I mean, all of them. And he had these little cassettes, and he'd throw them in the box after he taped them. He'd label them, and then he's going to go back to them later. But as you know, you never have time to go back and look at all the old pictures you took. So when he died, he gave Patrick and I all these tapes. Well, we were interested in the Foster period, and we went through them, and we actually found tapes of Reed talking to Brett Kavanaugh. And Reed was really, really good on the phone. You've got to go to the website, if for nothing else, just to hear the tapes of Brett Kavanaugh, because Kavanaugh is being questioned by Reed Irvine, and Reed, by this point, had learned enough to know that Foster's car is not at the park. So, when the report came out that John was holding up, the independent counsel's report, where John said nothing in here is true, they made it appear in that report that Foster's car was at the park. And Reed was grilling Kavanaugh about this report he wrote. He said, now, what evidence, he'd say to Brett, do you have that Foster's car was actually at the park? And Kavanaugh would hem and haw and say, well, there was a car there. And Reed would say, no, but how do you know it was Foster's car? What evidence do you have? And Reed, this goes on for maybe 45 minutes, and Reed just keeps pressing and pressing. And Kavanaugh, you can tell, is squirming. And finally, near the end, Kavanaugh admitted that all of the fire and rescue workers, and there are 26 of them, 26 people, all saw the brown car. Now, the brown car is not Foster's car. Patrick Knowlton saw the brown car, an older brown car. Foster's car was a newer gray model, not the same at all. And Kavanaugh admitted on this tape that all of the rescue workers saw the brown car. Well, then, after he realized he kind of talked too much,
Yes.
it's funny, at the very end of the tape, Kavanaugh says to Reed, you don't tape these conversations, do you, Reed?
Oh, you should have said that at the beginning.
Yeah, I should have said it at the beginning. And then Reed laughed out loud. And then he didn't answer, he just laughed. And then Kavanaugh says, is that a yes or a no? And Reed said, I tape all my conversations. He said, ask Mike Wallace from 60 Minutes. And then that was the end of it. But I mean, that was so funny because you realize that Kavanaugh talked too much and let out too much, and that he didn't have any evidence that that car was at the park. And I think that's one of the funniest tapes you've got at your website, John, is that Kavanaugh, especially that punchline at the end, you don't take these, do you? That's so fun. Yeah. And that was the Supreme Court. Nobody cares,
Let me just add one thing about Kavanaugh. The reason that he was talking to Reed Irvine was because after the report after Kavanaugh's report was released with the court-ordered appendix, Kavanaugh took a leave of absence from the Office of Independent Counsel. I was working at a law firm for a couple of months, and then when it all blew over and nobody reported the existence of this evidence of murder cover-up attached to the report, he came back to the Office of Independent Counsel. There's one more thing that I wanted to talk to you about. I could spend hours talking about this forensic evidence and the fact that this Office of Independent Counsel's report is just filled with lies. But I wanted to just one more item of the forensic evidence. I have here a photograph or a drawing of the gunshot residue that was found on Foster's hands. And here's a photograph of it. I think you can see that. You see the dark portion. And so what that shows is that the Foster did not pull the trigger. According to the Office of Independent Counsel, he actually pushed the trigger with his thumb, but it's impossible to do so. We had an exemplar weapon, and we set it up with pieces of plastic showing where the gunshot residue. You cannot push the trigger, and and get that gunshot residue, and that comes from the barrel cylinder gap. So here's a photograph of what really happened. He was pushing the gun away from him when the shot was fired. So that's not that is absolute proof that he did not fire the weapon. Absolutely.
Right, because if you're holding the gun, it would have had the gunpowder on this side, but if it's on this side, his hands are like this.
Right.
So it will.
Yeah. And of course, there are no fingerprints on the weapon. It was a drop gun. They put that in his hand. And Miguel Rodriguez, we talked about earlier, wrote a 30-page memorandum. I have a copy of it here. And he says, among other things, that he talks about a meeting he had with, I'll read the first sentence. Present for this meeting were Mark Toohey, Brett Kavanaugh, Jeff Green, and me. And he says, among other things, in this 30-page memorandum, that the police took the photographs, the initial photographs that were taken of the crime scene, staged the crime scene, rephotographed it, and then buried the initial photographs.
Oh, it's just amazing how sloppy a lot of this stuff can be, and you can bring them proof that there's a cover up, that they're lying about this, and they will literally look at you in the face and argue and tell you, no, you don't have the right. No, that's not the truth. What we said is true. It's bizarre because there's so much, especially now in the age with social media and everything. A lot of things are coming to light, and I'm with this case, I've always felt like this case was not what it was presented, even at a young age, as in a teenager, because I was very much into conspiracy theories and politics at the time. And the moment this happened, I was like, oh, he was murdered. Like right off.
Yeah, well, you're helping, Winnie. I mean, this is a different John has been telling me that things are different now because of this new media where there are podcasters, because John and Patrick back in the 90s used to go on talk radio. I think they did how many shows? Over 100, John?
I think it was 143 radio shows.
Yeah, but see, but that evaporates. You're a column of air. It goes out in the airwaves, and then it's done, and the next program comes on. But with podcasts, things you can bring them back up and share them and pass them around. It's a different age now.
Can you feel it? The shift in the air, the longer days, the promise of something new. Spring isn't just a season, it's a reminder that growth is always possible, and maybe this is your time to bloom. At Love and Lotus Tarot with Winnie Schrader, she can help you clear the energy of the past and step confidently into what's next. Whether you're navigating love, questioning your path, or simply searching for clarity, the cards offer insight, direction, and empowerment. This is your season of renewal, your season of healing, your season of stepping into alignment. Let's uncover the answers waiting for you and plant the seeds for the life you truly deserve. So book your reading today with Love and Lotus Tarot, and let's welcome the new beginning together. Visit lovelotustarot.com. Again, that is lovelotustarot.com, and book your session today.
Well, with that being said, I mean, what was the website again that you've created to dedicate to all of what you've done with the Vince Foster case?
Very easy to remember, vincefostermurder.com.
And there you have like a collection and assortment of all the information and research that you've done. I went on there. I'm going to be doing more digging on there. I'm going to listen to those audio, those recorded conversations because that sounds entertaining. And I'm glad that you're doing that. And I think this day and age with the technology and the way we can reach out, that's why I think a lot of these stories are unfolding because people are seeing through the BS and we have a way to get information out and talk to people that before were suppressed by the press, now have a voice like you guys. I mean, I did look back and saw the C-SPAN conference that you guys did, and I watched that as well just to see, you know, in contrast of what we know now versus what was fed to us back then, because it was over 30 years ago. It was quite some time ago, but now, what is your hopes? Obviously, you had the lawsuit, but Patrick now is no longer with us. But what's the hope at the end of this? Once, if people really glob onto this and say, you know what, you guys are right, we need to find justice. How can we go about justice in a 30-year-old case like this?
I would say podcasts, a
Okay.
popular long form podcast just like this one, because otherwise we can't really explain how sure we are and prove that it's a murder cover up.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's why I always encourage my listeners to always do your own research, ask questions, dig deep. And, and that's probably why I found you guys.
Well,
Because I'm always digging for a good story. And,
yeah, I'd like to plug a book if I could. There's David Martin is also was someone who collaborated with Patrick and John, and I met him through Reed Irvine. And Dave Martin wrote a book of Vince Foster. I think it was The Assassination of Vince Foster and the Murder of Vince Foster by Dave Martin, and he compares it to the Dreyfus affair in France. That's the book. Oh yeah, that's a great book. Then you'll read all about Patrick and John and myself. Martin is a great writer, and he's put the story down in a book form, and that's a great, great book. Of course, it's not well known, but it should be. But ideas, what are we hoping to go forward? I've kind of had a little bit of a spiritual awakening with the whole thing because I lost my faith in my fellow man, and I realized that when we tell the truth, whenever you tell the truth, you're in the presence of God because all truth comes from God. And things that are not true come from men. Things that are false don't come from God. And I think that that's why, to me personally, the truth is important about this case and any case that you might feature on your program, because when you tell the truth, you're moving closer to God, which I think is our ultimate end. And when you tell things that are false, you're moving away from God. And I think that's the ultimate end of man is union with God. But I think we get there by telling the truth and seeking the truth. And that's the ultimate truth. And that's where I'm going with it.
Yeah. Well, I totally agree. I mean, I'm the same way. I don't understand these lies and cover ups. I mean, I get that it benefits or they think that it's going to benefit them. But in the long run, it's not sustainable. Those lies will crumble and the truth will come out eventually. And then it's even worse than what it was.
Yeah.
And I've lost faith in my fellow man. I mean, just of recent events in Minneapolis and St. Paul over this last winter and the way people are treating each other and the lies and the cover ups. And it's just this continuous vile pattern that apparently is becoming part of the norm in society, which I can't stand. And that's why I'm always seeking people like you both of you that want to seek the truth and justice because that is the end all and that's the goal that we need. And, from seeing what I've been seeing in the news with the administration, with ICE, with Epstein, I mean, it's all a bunch of vile dishonesty and cover-ups and lies. It's just, is this the example we want to set forth to the world as a country? I don't think so. Um, and I applaud people like you that are saying, no, 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 no. This isn't the right way. We need to seek the truth in this. And to know that our government can have that much control over things is pretty scary, if you, especially when it comes to the press as well.
Well, it's healthy to know that we're not being told the truth about things, because then you can make decisions based on, as you say, you tell people to do their own research and find out, because you just can't trust what you're told and make decisions in your life based on that, because you could be going down the wrong path.
Exactly. Exactly. It's got to make sense to you, and logic. Logic goes a long way.
That's true.
Yeah. This, go ahead, John.
I don't know how much time we have left, but there are a couple of things. Do we have some time left?
Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, well, you mentioned that I filed a lawsuit on Patrick's behalf. That was the basis of that was witness tampering. It's a civil rights violation.
Yeah.
We also filed a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit and 4 grand jury applications asking the judge overseeing a grand jury to order Kenneth Starr to present this evidence that we have in this lengthy volume right here to the grand jury. And we filed it in the Eastern District of Virginia before the Special Division for the purpose of appointing independent counsels, before the district court in Washington, D.C., who was overseeing the grand jury, and then ultimately before the U.S. Supreme Court. And that's where this comes in. This was attached. This was a volume 2 of the appendix to the what we're asking the Supreme Court to do, and that was 2 things. Number 1, to reverse the dismissal of Patrick's civil rights lawsuit, and secondly, was a petition for writ of mandamus asking the Supreme Court to order Ken Starr to attach this evidence to the independent counsels. Asking them to present this evidence to the grand jury. So none of those were successful. And then the other thing that I would sort of like to cover, if we have time, is my meeting with Brett Kavanaugh.
Yeah. I want to hear about this.
Yeah, this is kind of interesting. Now, in the appendix, the second exhibit to the appendix is this, showing how Patrick was harassed in the streets of Washington, D.C., in his walk from the Foggy Bottom neighborhood to the DuPont Circle neighborhood over a 2-day period, and that's 25 men altogether. And the reason they did that was twofold, as we say in the appendix, the quarter appendix. Number 1 was to warn him, this is just how easy it's going to be to get to you if you keep telling the truth. And secondly, if you do continue to tell the truth, no one will believe you, because who is going to believe somebody who says that every time he leaves this building, there are strange men on every street corner staring at him, particularly when he said that when he was in Fort Marcy Park, there was this strange man who gave him, quote, a menacing stare. So that was the modus operandi that the government was using. So this was on a Thursday and a Friday. He testified before the grand jury on the following Wednesday, November 1. And on Friday, of course, we were still working on the case. And on Friday, Patrick called me and he explained to me what happened to him that day. And what he said was he's in his apartment building. He's walking out, or he's hanging out by the front desk, talking to the front desk person. And he noticed this guy very strange, pacing back and forth in front of the building. He thought that was strange. So then he noticed that somebody came into the apartment building with a fob, came in. So this person who was pacing back and forth followed the resident in. And when this guy got in and he saw Patrick standing there, he became startled and turned around and left right away. So Patrick said he didn't really know what to do, but he decided he was going to go confront the guy. So he walked out front to the building to confront the guy. He had walked about 20 feet to the right and was not facing the building. But when he turned around, he saw Patrick. he turned around, actually he turned around and he reached into his bag that he was carrying. And then he looked up and saw Patrick and immediately took his hand out of his bag. So we don't know if he was reaching for a gun or not. But anyway,
Mhm.
so Patrick started to walk towards him and the man turned and ran. So, and this is on the heels of this incredible, really quite cruel harassment that Patrick and one day his girlfriend was with him experienced. So by this time, I was a little bit angry about what was going on, and so I called up, picked up the subpoena, and turned it over, and saw Brett Kavanaugh's name with his telephone number there. This is the second conversation I had with him. I talked to him before Patrick testified for the grand jury, and anyway, I called him up and I said who I was and said there was somebody just in Patrick's building that was either here to kill him or to scare him. And I want a meeting with the OIC, that's the Office of Independent Counsel, and the FBI today. And this was about 3:30 in the afternoon. And so Kavanaugh, he kind of paused. He says, okay, how about 6 o'clock? So, okay. If I said, fuck, 6 o'clock. So at 6 o'clock, I show up and I'm escorted to a very small conference room. So let me tell you the setup of this conference room. Just to my left was Agent Jim Clement, who we've talked about, the expert in child abduction and sexual murder.
Right.
And he was on my left. And then directly across, this is a small conference room, directly across was Eric Lukenhoff. He's the supervisory FBI agent involved. And then to my far right was a retired FBI agent named Coy Copeland, who was assigned to the office. And then on my far left was a retired homicide detective, Jeff Green, who was assigned to the independent counsel. He was retired. And then Brett Kavanaugh. And Kavanaugh was seated against the wall. He wasn't at the table. He was seated against the wall just to Lukenhoff's left. And most of my conversation was with Lukenhoff, and I had some conversations with the person that was to Lukenhoff's left, to my right, which was Deputy Independent Counsel John Bates, who is now a U.S. District Court judge in the District of Columbia. But during the course of this conversation, I was speaking mostly with Lukenhoff, and I asked him, I explained to him what happened to Patrick. I complained about Patrick's just shameful treatment before the grand jury, and that was when Bates spoke up because he and Kavanaugh were in the grand jury, and I asked whether or not they would protect him. Whether or not they would assign an agent to him, and the answer was no and no. And I went back and forth, and we went back and forth. And the whole time that I was just discussing this, I could see Kavanaugh. He was just to my left against the wall. And that was the mistake when they placed him there, because he was a mess. He was a mess. I don't know if you saw him testify before Congress, but he was almost crying there. And in this case, he was looking around. He's just, when I said I thought that the guy was there to may have been there to murder him, Kavanaugh kind of lost it. He was just really showing his emotions, and he was that meeting lasted just under an hour, and the whole time he was a mess. And at the time, I didn't know that he was had been replaced, or he was the replacement for Miguel Rodriguez. But in any event, I think it's very interesting his reaction to the facts as I was setting them forward. And I can imagine when Kavanaugh's report was released with my 20 pages attached to it, I could just imagine he was a real mess. Then like I said, he left the Office of the Independent Counsel, took a leave of absence when that happened.
He's like, oh, God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Winnie John is a very remarkable attorney. The work he did on this case would have normally been done by a large law firm on K Street in Washington, D.C. This is a one-man operation in a studio apartment. And what we did was remarkable. John has these ideas. He knows how he's going to do this. When we got the independent counsel's report, John said, when you try to flip through it and find where they talk about the car, it's in 6 different places. And everything is discussed. When you're doing a cover-up report, you don't discuss the gunshot or the autopsy or anything in one place. It's all scattered all over the place. So you
Yeah.
can't consider. So John, in this apartment, we took these pages, took the independent counsel's report apart, and we put the pages up on the wall, okay? And there was a page, 114 pages went all the way from the kitchen, all the way around the apartment into toward the bathroom. And that what we did is we had all these documents that Patrick and I were going through, and we'd find things that contradicted what Kavanaugh had written in his report. So you've got a page of paper here, and then underneath of it going down, there might be 3, 7, 15 more pages with this evidence for the official record. And then we could walk around the room and look at something. And then you walk back on the other side of the room and look at it. And it was a remarkable idea that John had to look at the evidence this week, because it was like 360 degrees. It was no longer on a two-dimensional plane in a book. It was on the wall, and you can walk around and look at it. You remember that, John?
Oh yeah, yeah. And in this picture, it was just we have the one of the first chapters is an overview of the independent counsel's report, and we say he hides. Kavanaugh would hide something about the gun or the car in like 3 or 4 different places in different footnotes that really didn't have anything to do with the topic that it was noted to. But you had to kind of go all the way around the report to see what the independent counsel's report says about anything like the gunpowder. Speaking of gunpowder, the gunpowder was ball powder, and the cartridge that was ultimately recovered from the drop gun was manufactured by Remington. Remington has never used ball powder. Ball powder is used by people who reload. And what happened in this case is that it was reloaded with a light powder charge in order to minimize the blowback onto the shooter.
Oh, okay. Well, that makes sense. It's like they can't remember where they put the lies.
No, it was.
They're like, it's like, oh wait, where did we put that one? Was that in? They're just like they just, yeah, they can't keep their lies straight. They need to make a movie about this. Honestly,
Exactly. When we had all these papers hanging on the John, I said to John and Patrick, I said, "This has got to be in the movie. We got."
I know.
But that was how we did it. It was but he's this man, John. You were working 80 hours a week in this case, I think, at least.
Yeah, this thing, I think it's the equivalent of 3 people working full time, and that was over 17 months. It took forever. We had 10,000 pages of the federal investigative record, and we had them all into one file that we could search. And so we would, as you described, we would print out the pages that contradicted the independent counsel's report. So what this does, it says what the independent counsel's report says, then the contradictory evidence, the independent counsel, the contradictory evidence. And like I said, 17 months, we couldn't find anything that was in the independent counsel's report that was true.
That's amazing. Well, I'll have a link for your website, vincefostermurder.com. There's links for everything, your documentation, recordings of audio, clips on YouTube and things like that. It's very informative. I encourage my listeners, go check it out. I know I'm going to go down some Vince Foster rabbit hole now.
Be careful.
Take it all in because I love these type of puzzles. It's my jam, and I'm a truth seeker too. I want to know the real truth here. I know there's something fishy because if it smells like fish, it's fishy. You know what I'm saying? There's something not right with it, and God bless you guys for the work that you do and being a truth seeker because we need more people like you in this world, especially right now. And I'll also have a link for the book as well in today's show notes so people can find that book. I'm actually going to go purchase it myself right now because I'm very interested to take a look at that book as well. So I appreciate you guys for coming on and all the hard work that you do. And if there's any information that comes out or any updates, feel free to reach out to me. I'll get you guys back on and we can have a discussion about it. But again, the website please visit is vincefostersmurder.com. and I'll have a link for the book as well. But thank you guys so much for coming on, and thank you all listeners, and I hope to see you all next week. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Mysteries, Mayhem, and Merlot. And until our next case, my armchair detectives, stay safe, stay vigilant, and stay aware. I'll see you right here next week on Mysteries, Mayhem, and Merlot.